Marcus Denton was a street legend, Rocco Valles was a prison king. Together, they rewrote the rules of survival inside America's most violent prisons. From brutal gang wars in Blackridge to secret fight clubs in Lockwell, this is the real story of how two dangerous men turned chaos into strategy, and what it cost them. Marcus Denton, known on the streets of Detroit as Snipe, was no stranger to danger. By the time he turned 28, he had survived 5 shootouts, carried out 3 suspected hits, and walked free from 2 murder trials due to lack of evidence. He wore his reputation like armor. To his gang, he was a soldier. To rivals, a ghost in the shadows, but that reputation made him sloppy. The fall didn't come with a bang, it came with a surveillance tape. One warm summer evening, Marcus pulled into a gas station on the east side of the city. He didn't notice the unmarked van parked across the street. He was there to collect a debt, simple, quick, and violent if needed. What he didn't know was that the FBI had been watching him for months. As he stepped out of his car and approached his target, everything unraveled. A confrontation turned into a beating, then a pistol whipped warning, and finally, a shot fired to the leg. The victim survived. The cameras saw everything. That single mistake gave prosecutors exactly what they needed: intent, motive, and undeniable evidence. Marcus Denton was finally going to prison, and this time for a long time. His trial was quick. The defense barely tried. Too many priors, too many enemies. The judge gave him 5 years without parole. Blackridge Penitentiary would be his new home, a place nicknamed the Concrete Graveyard by inmates and guards alike. It was one of the most violent maximum security prisons in the country. Isolated in a remote region of Kentucky, Blackridge was known for its gang wars, corrupt staff, and nightly screams that echoed down steel corridors. For Marcus, it was supposed to be just another battleground. But prison was different. In prison, nobody cared who you were on the outside. On his first day inside, Marcus was greeted by silence, not respect. He was processed, searched, and walked past dozens of hardened lifers who eyed him like fresh meat. Blackridge wasn't about who you were. It was about what you could survive. Within hours of stepping into the general population, Marcus was tested. 3 men affiliated with a rival gang cornered him near the showers. One tried to talk. The other 2 moved with blades carved from plastic. Marcus fought back, but it wasn't enough. He was stabbed in the side and slashed across the shoulder before guards intervened. Blood loss, a punctured lung, and 2 cracked ribs put him in the infirmary for nearly a month. The attack changed everything. Word spread fast the new guy had bled. That meant he wasn't untouchable. He wasn't feared. He was now a target. His crew on the outside couldn't help him inside. Inside, the rules were different. Respect was earned through violence or strategy. Marcus had neither at that moment. When he returned to his cell block, the atmosphere had shifted. No one nodded at him. No one offered protection. Even the guards looked at him differently, as if they were waiting to see if he'd make it another week. He spent days watching, listening, and trying to figure out the hierarchy of Blackridge. Who ran what block, who passed messages, who sold contraband. It was a different kind of war. One fought with whispers and knives hidden inside books. Marcus knew one thing: he needed an angle. He couldn't survive alone, and he couldn't fake strength. He tried to keep his head down, but violence in Blackridge was constant. One night, the cell next to his was set on fire. 2 days later, a body was found in the laundry room with the number 5 carved into its chest. It was a warning from one of the prison gangs. Marcus was starting to realize that prison wasn't just punishment. It was a hunting ground. He began skipping meals in the mess hall, choosing to eat in his cell to avoid conflict. He moved silently, spoke little, and watched everyone. That's when he noticed a pattern. A certain inmate, older, calm, and untouched by the chaos, seemed to move through the prison with ease. Guards nodded at him. Inmates cleared space when he walked by. That man was Rocco Valles. And whether he knew it or not, Marcus's survival depended on getting close to him. Because in Blackridge, power didn't come from reputation. It came from alignment, and Marcus had run out of time to stay unaligned. Rocco Valles had been in Blackridge Penitentiary for nearly 2 decades. He was a former cartel soldier from El Paso, sentenced to life for drug trafficking, weapons possession, and 5 confirmed murders tied to a botched DEA raid. Rocco never spoke about his past, but his presence told the story. Tall, lean, and covered in tattoos inked in prison, he moved like a man who had seen death up close and taught it how to wait. His eyes were cold, calculating. But unlike most predators in Blackridge, Rocco didn't speak unless he had to. He didn't shout, didn't threaten. He didn't need to. Marcus Denton had been watching him for days. Rocco ate alone, sat in the far corner of the yard, and was the only inmate who never got searched during shakedowns. He had influence, the kind that didn't require muscle. In a place like Blackridge, that made him dangerous and valuable. Marcus knew aligning with him wouldn't be easy. Rocco didn't take in strays, and he didn't hand out favors. The opportunity came during a routine lockdown. A fight had broken out in C Block, and the entire prison was placed under emergency protocol. For 12 hours, inmates were confined to their cells, and tensions boiled. Marcus was housed 2 cells down from Rocco's. Through the walls, he could hear the sound of quiet tapping, coded messages being passed along the line. Most inmates used knock codes to send warnings or coordinate movement. Marcus listened. He didn't understand the messages, but he recognized the rhythm. It was Rocco directing the communication. That night, Marcus did something risky. He slid a folded piece of paper under Rocco's cell door. On it, he'd written just 6 words. "I can move without being seen." It was a gamble, possibly a fatal one. If Rocco saw it as disrespect, Marcus could end up with a blade in his gut. But if it worked, it might change everything. By morning, the paper was gone. Nothing was said. Days passed. Then, a test. During a transfer to the prison kitchen, Marcus found a small parcel slipped into his laundry bin. It was a packet of contraband pills, likely painkillers or sedatives, worth a small fortune inside. No note, no instructions. But Marcus knew exactly what it was, a job. Without hesitation, he moved. He stashed the pills inside a hollowed-out piece of bread and passed it to a kitchen worker known for smuggling. The pills reached their destination. The transaction was smooth, silent, and untraceable. 2 days later, Marcus was approached by one of Rocco's men, an older inmate named Drex with faded gang ink and a missing finger. "Walk with me," he said. That was the beginning. Rocco didn't say much when they finally spoke. He simply told Marcus that his actions showed potential. Not trust, never that, but usefulness. In prison, usefulness was more valuable than loyalty. Rocco explained the way things really worked. The guards, many were compromised, paid off scared, or simply indifferent. The gangs, fragile alliances held together by fear and drugs. The true power was in information and control. 2 things Rocco had mastered over years of patience. Marcus became part of Rocco's circle, a small and tight, knit group that operated quietly, staying beneath the noise of gang wars and race riots. His jobs varied. Sometimes he passed messages, other times he delivered small packages. But every task had a purpose, and every move was calculated. He learned how to study guard rotations, how to hide weapons inside ventilation grates, and how to disable security cameras without being noticed. Under Rocco's mentorship, Marcus was becoming something else, someone no longer just surviving, but maneuvering. But nothing in Blackridge came without cost. Rocco had enemies, many of them, and his growing influence had begun to threaten the balance inside D Block, where Tyrone, Brick, Maddox ruled the drug trade with violence and paranoia. Brick was unpredictable, paranoid, and backed by a gang with numbers. He saw Rocco's quiet rise as a threat to his business. And once Brick learned that Marcus was part of Rocco's crew, the warning signs came quickly. A shank under his bunk, a coded message scratched onto his tray, and a stare that lasted too long in the yard. Rocco didn't flinch. Instead, he doubled down. He told Marcus that war was coming. Not the kind with fists, but the kind that changed control of entire blocks. There would be blood. There would be consequences. But in the end, only one side would rule D Block, and Marcus would be right in the center of it. For the first time since entering Blackridge, Marcus felt something unfamiliar: purpose. But in a place built on violence and betrayal, purpose could be the most dangerous weapon of all. Taking control of D Block wasn't just about power. It was about survival. In Blackridge Penitentiary, whoever controlled D Block controlled the drugs, the movement, the flow of cigarettes, blades, and everything else that made prison life manageable or deadly. Tyrone, Brick, Maddox had run it with an iron grip for 6 years. Tall, broad, and covered in gang ink, Brick was feared for a reason. He'd survived 2 assassination attempts and was rumored to have ordered the deaths of at least 9 inmates from inside his cell. No one made a move without his say. He didn't share power, and he didn't forgive betrayal. Rocco Valles had waited years to make his move. He wasn't interested in chaos, he wanted control. Unlike Brick, Rocco worked in silence, building networks instead of armies. But Brick's paranoia was growing. His lieutenants were sloppy. His crew was split by internal rivalries. Rocco knew time was running out. If he didn't strike first, he and his crew, including Marcus Denton, would be targets. The choice was clear: take D block or be buried in it. The plan came together over weeks. Every detail was studied: guard shifts, blind spots in the camera system, access points to the showers, and the daily routine of Brick and his closest men. Rocco's crew avoided attention, blending into the background. Marcus acted as a runner, relaying silent messages through folded notes and head nods. Every move had to be invisible. If even one detail slipped, they wouldn't get a second chance. The chosen day was a Tuesday, when Brick's crew rotated through the shower stalls in groups. It was the only time they split up. The first signal was a blackout, just 5 seconds, caused by a sabotaged fuse in the utility room. That 5 seconds was enough. Marcus and 2 others rushed into the showers. Brick was caught mid-conversation, completely exposed. The attack was brutal. Shivs made from melted plastic and sharpened steel tore into him. He fought back hard, breaking one attacker's jaw with a single punch. But it wasn't enough. 12 stab wounds brought Brick down, and he bled out before the guards even realized something had gone wrong. Rocco's crew didn't celebrate. They disappeared into the noise, mixing into the chaos that erupted as word of Brick's death spread like wildfire. Within minutes, D block was locked down. Sirens screamed. Guards stormed in with batons drawn, dragging inmates from their cells. Marcus was pulled into solitary, along with nearly 20 others. For 3 days, no one spoke. Lights stayed on 24 hours a day. Meals were reduced to a slice of bread and water. The administration wanted names, but nobody talked. When Marcus was released back into general population, the landscape had changed. Brick's crew had fractured. Without their leader, they had no structure, no command. Some were transferred, others were isolated, and a few simply vanished. Rumors said one of them had hanged himself in his cell. Whether it was fear or revenge, no one knew for sure. Now Rocco controlled D block, but with power came exposure. The prison staff took notice. Blackridge's warden, a man who had long turned a blind eye to inmate politics, started cracking down. Surprise searches increased. Privileges were revoked. Anyone tied to Rocco's crew was marked. It wasn't long before the administration decided to split the power base. Marcus was transferred with no warning. Early one morning, 2 guards entered his cell and told him to pack up. No explanation. No chance to say goodbye. He was placed in chains, loaded onto a van, and driven hours away. His new destination, Lockwell Supermax, a facility known for housing the most uncontrollable, violent inmates in the system. A place where riots were common and rules were few. The ride there was silent, but Marcus understood what was happening. His removal wasn't random. It was strategy. The prison wanted to break up Rocco's structure, cut the legs out from under him. Marcus was part of that leg. He wasn't just a foot soldier anymore. He had risen fast, made enemies, and now he was being isolated. Lockwell was worse than anything he had imagined. The walls felt colder, the air heavier. There were no allies here. No silent nods or hidden networks to lean on. On his first night, he heard screams echo through the ventilation system. Not shouting, screaming, and no one responded. In Blackridge, Marcus had earned protection through usefulness. In Lockwell, he'd have to start from nothing again. And this time, the game would be different. The politics, the players, the dangers, all new. But Marcus had learned something critical from Rocco: power doesn't wait to be given. It has to be taken, one move at a time. And in a place like Lockwell, those moves would come with blood. Lockwell Supermax was a different kind of hell. Unlike Blackridge, where politics and structure ruled, Lockwell was governed by raw violence. The guards didn't pretend to keep order, they kept a distance. The walls were thicker, the lights always dim, and the smell of sweat and blood lingered in every corridor. In Lockwell, the predators didn't wait for opportunities. They created them. Marcus Denton knew immediately he wasn't in control here. No one cared that he had been part of a power shift in Blackridge. That name meant nothing now. Here, respect came from pain, either causing it or surviving it. From the first day, he kept to himself, observed the routines, studied faces, and kept moving. But Lockwell didn't allow anyone to stay invisible for long. It started with whispers. He heard mentions of something underground, something the guards didn't talk about but quietly supported. Rumors of organized violence, off-camera fights, and secret deals. Then he noticed the pattern. Certain inmates were healthier, had access to better food, and were moved more freely around the prison. These weren't gang leaders, they were fighters. Marcus began to understand. There was an underground fight club operating deep in Lockwell's lower levels, run not by inmates, but by corrupt staff. The entry point was the laundry wing, a section that always had broken cameras and heavy staff presence. No one questioned why certain inmates spent hours there, only to come out limping or bruised. Marcus watched, waited, and finally made contact with a man named Flint, mid-40s, bald, face scarred, and known for breaking jaws. Flint was one of the fighters, and he had noticed Marcus's calm demeanor and scars. Flint gave him a choice: watch from the sidelines or step in the ring. Marcus knew he had no choice. Refusing an invitation was seen as weakness, and in Lockwell, weakness got you buried, so he agreed. The first fight was nothing like he expected. No audience, no cheering. Just a poorly lit basement room with padded walls and a camera in the corner. 2 guards watched, stone-faced. The opponent was a wary inmate from Mississippi named Cage, known for using elbows like knives. The fight was fast, violent, and personal. Marcus took hits he didn't see coming and gave out punishment with instinct. It ended with Cage unconscious and Marcus bleeding from the mouth. The guards simply nodded and left. That victory changed everything. Marcus was now part of the system. He received extra food, more shower time, and occasional moments outside of solitary, privileges no one else had. The guards didn't talk to him, but they started watching him. He had value now, even if it was as a piece in someone else's game. But with each fight, the stakes got higher. The opponents became bigger, faster, and meaner. There was no weight class, no fairness, and no safety. Marcus learned how to fight smarter. Targeting joints, using body weight, controlling breath. Every injury was another lesson. Every win was a step closer to something more. That's when he found out about the transfers. Fighters who survived long enough and drew attention from certain prison officials were sometimes given the option to transfer out, not as a reward, but as a business move. Other prisons paid for fighters. It was a quiet exchange, bruised bodies traded like property. Marcus saw his chance, not for freedom, but for escape. Lockwell wasn't just dangerous, it was a trap, and the only way out was through one last fight. The final match was against Juno Briggs, a former Marine convicted of killing 3 men in a bar fight. 6'8", built like a truck, Juno was the main attraction. No one had lasted more than 5 minutes with him. Flint warned Marcus that this was a test, and the guards weren't expecting him to win. They wanted blood, a spectacle, an execution. Marcus didn't care. He stepped into the ring knowing this was it. The fight was brutal from the start. Juno moved like a hammer. Every punch meant to end it. But Marcus had speed, endurance, and desperation. He took hits that rattled his bones and responded with precision. Then, a moment, an opening. Marcus drove his elbow into Juno's rib, the same spot over and over. Juno faltered. The pain grew. Internal bleeding was setting in. 10 minutes later, Juno collapsed, unable to breathe. The guards stared in disbelief. Marcus had won. They didn't cheer. They didn't speak. But the next day, a transfer order arrived. Marcus was being moved again. Lockwell had used him, and now they were selling him off to the highest bidder. He didn't care. Wherever he was going, it would be better than this. Maybe not safer, but quieter. The kind of place where he could finally think again. He had survived Lockwell, and that meant he could survive anywhere. Marcus Denton's transfer out of Lockwell Supermax was quiet and sudden. No goodbye, no explanation. Just another chain around his waist, a van with dark windows, and 2 guards who said nothing during the 6-hour drive. When the gates opened at his new destination, a medium security prison in rural Iowa, the air felt different, quieter. The walls weren't covered in grime. The guards looked bored instead of afraid. It wasn't freedom, but it was something close to peace compared to the blood-soaked concrete he had left behind. In this new prison, Marcus wasn't a name. He wasn't Snipe, the gang enforcer from Detroit. He was just another inmate with a number. No one here knew what he had done or what he had survived, and that was exactly how he wanted it. He kept to himself, spoke only when necessary, and stayed far away from the prison politics. There were gangs here, but they weren't the monsters of Blackridge or Lockwell. They were clumsy, more interested in stolen commissary than in carving empires out of violence. Marcus spent his days in the library or in his cell, reading books on psychology, warfare, and strategy. He became a student of silence, understanding how people moved, how they reacted to stress, and how they formed hierarchies without even realizing it. After everything he'd seen, he wanted no part in it anymore. He didn't crave power, he craved distance. But the past never stays buried in prison. Rumors began to circulate. Someone mentioned his name during a poker game in the rec yard. Another inmate recognized a scar from the fight with Juno. Soon, word spread. Marcus Denton had survived Blackridge and Lockwell. He wasn't just another inmate. He was a survivor of America's worst. And in prison, that kind of reputation was both shield and target. The staff took notice too. One morning, Marcus was pulled aside by a new SO who called him Lockwell's champ. It wasn't said with admiration. It was said with warning. The guards didn't want a fighter in their yard. Too much risk. Too much attention. Marcus denied everything, but it was too late. The calm he had built was cracking. Then came the letter, slipped under his pillow in the middle of the night. No name, no return address. Just a single sentence. Rocco's dead. The words hit like a knife. Rocco Valles, his mentor, his guide, the man who had shown him how to survive behind walls, was gone. The prison listed it as suicide, but Marcus knew better. Rocco didn't make mistakes. If he died, it was because someone wanted him silenced. The news shook something loose inside Marcus. Rocco had warned him that power never disappears. It just waits for someone to take it again. Blackridge had been on the edge of a second war, and if Rocco was gone, that war had either already started or was being buried by bodies. Marcus had a choice. He could stay quiet, keep his head down, and finish his time in relative peace. Or he could dig into what happened, call in favors, and open old wounds. But he knew what that would cost. The longer he stayed in the system, the more danger he attracted. Survival was no longer about fighting. It was about disappearing. So, he made a decision. He wrote a letter not another inmate, but to a parole officer, not asking for favors, but offering information. Names, locations, smuggling routes. Not because he wanted revenge, but because he wanted out. For real. If he could give them enough, maybe, just maybe, they'd cut time off his sentence. Maybe they'd move him again, into something closer to a second chance. He didn't trust the system. He never had. But he trusted the rules of leverage. If you're useful, you're protected. At least for a while. The letter was mailed quietly. Weeks passed. No response. But Marcus kept preparing. Kept reading. Kept watching. Every day was a test of patience, of willpower. He wasn't fighting with fists anymore. He was fighting with silence, with strategy. That was the only way to win now. And if the system turned on him again, if the past found him once more, he'd be ready. Because Marcus Denton didn't just survive America's most violent prisons. He learned from them. And what he learned was simple: power changes. Pain fades. But those who adapt, they endure.